reason why I do these workshops is this. Software development is essential in today's world, especially in the workforce. But only about 1% of the world actually knows how to write code from scratch. So when apps like Lovable came out about a year ago, that really unlocked the other 99% of the world in order to build and publish their own applications. A little bit about me. So I'm the founder of the organization We Build with AI, community of AI experts, do things from AI coding workshops to lightning hackathons to corporate trainings. You can see some of the people that have come through the workshops in the last 6 months. We've had over 30 events in Seattle and virtually. At this point, over 2,000 people have come through these events. I've done them for last week. I actually did one for Harvard Business School for their second year MBAs on how they can develop full stack applications using Lovable. I work with a lot of different vibe coding platforms as well, depending on the use case, depending on the subject of the workshop. My personal background, so I do not have a coding background. I learned enough of some of the key languages like HTML, JavaScript, SQL, Python at some of the early stage startups that I worked at. And I also worked at Uber as one of the first 10 people in Brazil and helped scale that country in Latin America and basically taught most of Brazil how to use SQL. But I've also worked at big companies like Amazon and AWS before they started doing layoffs. And I also currently work for a couple organizations, one of them being AI Tinkerers. I'm also an AI expert in residence at AI2 Incubator, and I'm basically the vice president for AI programs and partnerships for the Harvard Business School Alumni Club here in Seattle. Okay, so what is vibe coding or agentic coding or AI coding generation or whatever kind of flavor you want to call it this month? Well, the term vibe coding, which I think is the most popular of the terms, was coined by one of the co-founders of OpenAI. And he basically said it's like forgetting that you're actually writing code and just letting kind of your thoughts flow and see what the AI helps you build. There are a lot of things that you can do with these coding platforms. Some of them you still need some training, which is why I made some of these workshops and some more advanced workshops. But the point is the barrier to getting started and actually creating your own application has been a lot lower over the last year. And I want to put kind of vibe coding and AI in context of some other technologies. How many people have seen this graph before and kind of know about the technology adoption curve and crossing the chasm? Okay, so a few people. This is actually a framework that was developed by a professor at the University of Washington, but is one of the ways that a lot of businesses and people think about different technologies and where we're at in the adoption cycle. But this framework only says what percentage of the population is using a technology. It doesn't say anything about how fast we go through these different phases. But the theory is there are kind of a small set of innovators and early adopters that try new technologies, even if they're in early stages, even if they're not as usable or don't have a clear value proposition. But once a technology is launched that allows it to cross the chasm, that leads to more rapid adoption by the majority of people and eventually kind of becomes a requirement for doing your job or even kind of living your life in some instances. So if we look at computers, for instance, it took 34 years for the Apple II to be invented, which is, I think, is the technology that allowed computers to cross the chasm and anyone be able to use them. If you look at how long it then took for the majority of people to use computers, it only took another 23 years, but overall, 57 years. So multiple generations had a chance to adopt computers before there was a requirement to do your job. And basically another 14 years after that, so 2014, if you weren't using a computer, you were a laggard in the last 16%, and probably weren't able to get a lot of the jobs that were out in the marketplace. The internet only took 11 years to cross the chasm with the Netscape browser. And it only took another 6 years in order for it to be adopted by a majority of people. So 17 years, about one generation. And then because how fast it got adopted relative to computers, it took a little bit longer for almost everyone to use it. Now, AI and LLMs, I would say, started in 2017 when transformers were invented. And ChatGPT is probably the first time that most of the people in this room heard of AI and LLMs. So that only took 5 years. And using kind of what we've seen in terms of adoption rates and speed for these last technologies, this means that next year, basically, the majority of people will be using AI and LLMs. And so that only took 9 years. So if you look at the rate of adoption, it is accelerating very quickly. And it used to take multiple generations, and then one generation, and then now 9 years, at least when I worked at Amazon, is about the amount of time it takes for someone to be promoted from director to vice president. So the people making decisions today in technology companies haven't really used these technologies since they started working, or maybe even haven't actually used them in an execution role. And that leads to what we're experiencing right now, which I think is a lot of chaos. And there are a few reasons for this. One is that technology is moving faster than workers can adopt, but also faster than companies can adopt. And as of yesterday, we're adding one more clip to this, right? And specifically, Amazon said that the reason why they were doing these layoffs is because of AI. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but they basically said we need to reduce the layers, increase our speed of output, and invest more in AI at the expense of having more people. And how people are using AI over the last 9 years is also changing pretty drastically. So this was a study by the Harvard Business Review that looked at how people were using AI based on crawling Reddit. So 2023 to 2024, you can see the top use cases and how that changed from when they did the analysis again, looking back a year from March. And the biggest mover was code generation, which is what we're talking about today. And the second biggest mover was improving code, which is also related to what we're talking about today. And the reason for that is a year ago, Replit, Bolt, and Lovable launched, which I would say is a different category of vibe coding tools that is more accessible to anyone and is capable. But before then, most of the coding tools were targeted at professional developers, such as GitHub Copilot and Cursor. So this really kind of creates two different segments of applications, one that can be used by anyone and is much more capable than if you try to write code yourself. But then the other segment is something where you still have a pretty high learning curve. You still need to know some concepts of software development and coding, but it gives you essentially superpowers to multiply the code that you generate and solve more complex tasks. And so agentic coding, I would say, crossed the chasm in 3 years. If GitHub Copilot launched in 2021 and Bolt, Replit, and Lovable launched a year ago, that means that also, basically next year, most of the people who write code, or even the people who don't write code now and will write code in the future, are going to be using these tools. And so again, that's just another example of how fast these technologies, adoption curves, are accelerating with each new technology. And when I look at kind of what my product org was, like this is kind of a representation of the product org I led at Amazon. Lots of layers, lots of specialized roles, not any AI being used like 3 years ago, right? When I am working with AI native startups right now, their structure is much different. Their entry-level roles, which are few and far between these days, are more what I call product developers. And so they need to have enough knowledge in product management, in software development, and in design in order to make most of the decisions that are easy to make and create prototypes that leverage, and they can leverage agents, and those agents are managed by experts. But there's a lot fewer people managers now, right? There's maybe one people manager for this entire organization, and that allows you to increase the spans and decrease the layers of bureaucracy within an organization and move faster, right? If you have a flatter org, you can be more nimble. And the key with these teams is they're AI first, which means before you start doing something manually, you first think about how can I use AI to do this.